Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting installment of Snakenanigans and Stories. Thank you all for joining me on this evening. Me and my little friend, who I match with today, Moonlight. Just gonna wait for a couple more people to join in, and then we will be ready spaghetti. I see some little eyeballs popping up. Thank you all for joining me on this very spoopy day, enjoying the sweater weather finally. And I hope that you're enjoying Halloween season and spoopy season and spooky season and fall and autumn and all this other stuff as much as we possibly can, given our current situation in the world, and that's why I'm here. So again, I want to welcome you to the second edition of Snakenanigans and Stories, and I also wanted to extend an invitation again, which I did earlier this spring, for folks who feel like they are a little bit lost in the abyss and might need to talk or blow off steam, or just have somebody to listen. I do have experience as a counselor. This was as a crisis counselor on a crisis hotline many years ago, so I can pull out those old supportive listening skills if anybody out there ever needs to chat. And it can be a personal chat, it can be text message or something like that. So, just let me know. You may notice that tonight I am not at home. This is not where I live. That would be pretty rad, but I am house sitting and dog sitting, and I have a snake with me, so we're not going to tell anybody about that. But she's well secured in her little travel carrier, and the doggo is snoozing behind me on the couch, but you can't see her. And I've got Ghost Adventures on in the background for a little bit of added spoopiness. Although we could play a fun, drinking game if we wanted to, every time they equate witchcraft with Satanism and demonic activity. We could all take a drink and then be in the hospital in no time. Or for those who canceled their gym routine tonight to be here, you could turn on Ghost Adventures, and every time they mention witchcraft or demons, you could do some push-ups and then also probably end up in the hospital with me later tonight. Or you could just be here with me for Snakenanigans and Stories, and every time I say Snakenanigans or Stories, you could also take a drink or have a push-up, or if you're a little kiddo that's joining us, also eat some kind of snack. I don't know. Enjoy. Choose your own adventure. So last time, if you were with me last week, we had a little bit of a weird time. Snakenanigans indeed lived up to its name because Dewey the boa knocked over the microphone halfway through the program and turned off the video. And my video on my computer, so that you guys don't think I'm an idiot, continued to go for like another 5, almost 10 minutes. And then it shut off and told me that, like, oh, you lost your live feed. And so I just kept going. And by the time I caught up with everybody for the second part, for part 2, I was way ahead and all of this material got lost. So I know that it's Facebook Live and not like operating, a space shuttle, but apparently I just have issues with this technology. But this week, since Moonlight is much tinier and easier to handle, we should not have any issues with, the shut off. And I'm going to go back and reread the stories that y'all missed and were probably thinking like, what happened there. So our lineup for this evening is going to include SpookyTalk Q&A, and I do expect answers. I demand answers. We're going to do another story from Short and Shivery, and I'm really excited about tonight's story. I'm excited about all the stories, but I'm really jazzed that I got a copy of that book, which was another one of my favorites from my childhood. We'll do a story from More Scary Stories, as always. And I have another story from my uncle, and this comes to us on a handwritten letter that I'm very thrilled to be able to share because he had sent me a bunch of handwritten letters while I was writing Maryland Ghosts. And he's done that since then, but this was like way back in 2011, and it's very cool, especially in our, our modern day, to still sort of write handwritten letters back and forth with somebody, especially a relative who has all of these incredible life experiences the way that he does. And we'll also rehash the stories from last time that we missed, which will be one from my Uncle Bernie and another one from the Scary Stories series. So I did want to share my current reading. I tore through Doll Bones like crazy because it's such an excellent book, and I try to read it every fall. And now I'm shifting gears for a little bit to read my friend Lisa Cleary's book, How to Survive a Breakup When All of Your Friends Are Birthing Their Second Child. And I'm also tearing through this because it's funny, it's relatable, it's heartwarming. Lisa is an up-and-coming author. She is like the coolest. I went to high school with her. I got to do a little author praise blurb in the book, and I'm super honored that she asked me to do that. And so please get your copy of that and support her in her awesome journey as an author. So our Spooky Talk prompt for the night, and hi to everybody who has joined. Thank you all for being here for Snakenanigans and Stories. All right, let's see. I'm going to pick a random card from the Spooky Talk stack. This is something that we picked up on our trip in Galena, and it's probably a little dated, but I love stuff like this, so hopefully you guys will indulge me. And it's going to be like a thought-provoking question, and, we'll talk about it. All right, Spooky Talk. Well, this is fun. Okay, so The Blob is a 1958 movie featuring an amorphous alien that comes to Earth and terrorizes a small Pennsylvania town. Oh, I'm not going to touch that. I want to make a political joke so badly. Its size and shape enables it to slowly engulf people in a horrific manner. The Blob is considered one of the best horror films of the 1950s. And then, of course, there's also the remake. So the question that goes along with this for Spooky Talk, and feel free to discuss with your family and friends if you're tuning in, feel free to write your answer in the comments. What is the biggest mess you have ever made, and how did you clean it up? So I definitely want to know. And that's not a controversial, paranormal question where anybody has to feel embarrassed that they're talking about, ghosts or anything. So please, please, please share what was the biggest mess that you ever made and how did you clean it up? And it can be a literal mess. We don't have to get into our life issues or anything like that. So, all right, let's talk about Moonlight, the spotted python. I have literally 7 pieces of paper spread out everywhere because I got really excited when I was doing my research about spotted pythons. So this is Moonlight. Whoa, there she is, and she's gorgeous. She has a beautiful little velociraptor face. So she's a spotted python. Spotted pythons are sometimes also called Eastern small blotched pythons, as well as Eastern children's pythons. And children's pythons are also a separate species. But that's getting technical. And they come from Australia and New Guinea, so northern Australia. And they're one of the world's smallest pythons. And the genus that they come from, Antaresia, has 4 members in it, and they're all comprised of the smallest and cutest pythons in the world. And those pythons are, for those who want to get deep, deep down in it, the Stimson's python, the pygmy or the anthill python, children's pythons, who are named after a dude whose last name was Children, and then spotteds. So they are obviously very beautiful. She's got these gorgeous spotted blotched markings, which she'll have all of her life. They were very bright and distinct when she was a baby, and now they're getting a little less distinct as she gets older, but she still has this beautiful iridescent pattern to her. And that's one of their distinctive features. So adults get to be about 3 to 3.5 feet long. She's already 3 years old, and I guess almost 3 years old. And she's not going to get much bigger than this. She'll probably get fatter, so she is continuing to grow. and she graduated this year to a 20-gallon terrarium, and she's gotten fatter since then just because she's got this room to flourish now. And she's a very good eater, but she's not going to get like a huge ton bigger than she is right now. So they're a great size for, you know, for as a pet. And they lay up to 15 eggs per clutch, and they live about 20 years. So of course, many snakes that are kept in captivity will live much longer than that. I was on a Zoom conference the other night with the Chicago Herpetological Society, and a guy had a milk snake that was like 52 years old. Dude had this snake its entire life. So they will live a long time if they're well cared for in captivity, and they might live slightly shorter lives out in the wild because of, you know, wilderness. So, of course, I want to mention, it's not obvious to everybody that, you know, all snakes and reptiles are cold-blooded, which means that they have to rely on their environment around them for their temperature gradients. And she is nocturnal, even though she specifically, Moonlight, is fairly active, you know, at different periods of the day and night, although I can hear her all night wrestling around in her terrarium. They're nocturnal. They will live in like a variety of places in Australia, which has like such an extreme range of habitats and everything, and of like, you know, humidity and temperatures and things like that. And so they're pretty comfortable anywhere. They have these cool slitted eyes. Whoa, extreme close up. That help them assess depth, that help them understand depth. And then they have these pits. They're called pits, like right by her. That's not helping. Sorry, excuse me. Right, wrong way. They're under her mouth, like on the side of her face. You can see she has these things that are called pits, and they detect infrared radiation of warm-blooded animals around them. And many types of pythons have this, and all snakes will also use their tongues. When they're flicking their tongues in and out, they are using them to sense and gather information about their environment in kind of the way that we have smell. So they don't see poorly, but they rely more on their other senses to help them figure out what's going on around them. And one of the coolest fun facts about spotted pythons, which is also very fitting for the season, is that they love caves. They love rocky outcrops, and so they will often hang out around caves, and they will catch bats in midair. So I would imagine that they would have to be pretty tiny bats to be consumed by these little pythons. But it's interesting to imagine, and she does do some acrobatic acts when we feed her. So we feed her specifically mice. She eats little tiny mice. They're called, the ones that she's still on fuzzies, but she gets 2 fuzzies a week. And then she will graduate to a larger size after we're kind of done getting through this giant freezer pack of frozen fuzzies that we have on hand. So that's why. But they, in the wild and in captivity, they'll also sometimes accept other types of food. So they will eat, you know, birds and small mammals. Sorry, beautiful. And even the occasional lizard or amphibians and things like that, depending on, you know, where they live in the wild, and then what they grow up with as well in captivity. But mostly, I mean, you know, keep it simple and we do the frozen thawed for them. We're not like a zoo or anything crazy. Sometimes they're referred to as Macs. So if you hear like a super hardcore reptile nerd talking about like, bro, my Mac, my beautiful Mac, I got this Mac. They are referring to a spotted python, which are sometimes called Macs because their full scientific name is Antaresia maculosa. Something that you didn't need to know, and now you know. Now let me make sure I got all my notes on page 1. I think we can check that off. let us go to page 2. Now, so we've had her since March 2018 when she was a wee little baby. We got her when she was probably just a couple of months old. And so we've gotten to watch her grow. She used to fit into the palm of our hands. And if you scroll back in my Facebook, you can see, the pictures. There's a picture of when she was super duper tiny. She's always been very cool. They're known for their even temperaments, even though sometimes, I've heard that they were unpredictable, but I've also heard that they're supposed to be very even tempered. And she is most assuredly very even tempered. She and Miles, our corn snake, who you'll meet next week, are our most active snakes. She's out whenever she pleases throughout the day, during the nighttime. She's not shy. She loves to check out her surroundings. She loves to bask under her heat lamp. So she's our only snake that likes to bask under her heat lamp. Everybody else hates it's too warm for them. They're divas. So she is around 2.5 years old, and she's probably approaching, or she'll probably be approaching 3 years old. I can't read my chicken scratch. Now, how do we know that she's a girl? So she's also our only girl. Everybody else is a boy to our knowledge as far as we know. And, there's 2 ways of knowing for sure if your snake or if a snake is a boy or a girl. And those are called probing and popping. Both of them sound terrible and horrifying, and they are. So some people can just do it without even thinking about it. I've never done it. I've only taken snakes to a vet or to a professional who can actually say so. And for us, it doesn't matter what gender they are. It's more for like naming and sort of imagining, giving them a personality or something like that. It would only really matter if you're going to breed them or something like that. And we are adopting snakes in order to, be good Samaritans and support conservation and animal welfare efforts, not to continue, this rampant breeding of pet industry animals. So anyway, probing is when you very gently take a little metal probe and you stick it in their vent. So this is a vent right here. It's this little flap, this little opening where they do all of their business. It's called a cloaca also, I believe, and it's where everything happens, both sexually and excrementally, if that's a word. And you would put a probe down into their tail, and if the probe would only go 1 to 3 scales, you know that it's a female. And if it would go many more scales, up to 10 or 12, I believe, then you know that it's a male. Popping is an even more obvious way to tell, but you can't really do it when they're tiny, and that's literally when you take that little tail part and you massage it in such a way that the hemipenes would pop out. So snakes have 2, but they only use 1 at a time. And the hemipenes or the hemipenis. Aren't you glad that you joined me this evening for this enlightening discussion? And so then you know for sure that you have a boy. And so she was probed, and we discovered that she is a girl. And we might do it again in a couple of months or another year just to be absolutely sure. But again, just out of, curiosity to make sure that we haven't, there are some differences in size between males and females. Females are generally bigger. They have to hold a lot of eggs in their bodies and things like that. So sometimes it's also a good kind of field marker if you have a snake to know okay, this is an appropriate size for a boy or for a girl. I keep saying boy and girl, male or female. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. And so she lives in a 20-gallon terrarium. All of our snakes have newspaper as their substrate. It's clean and simple and easy and, looks good. And she also has some realistic looking plants and some hide boxes and a little log in there. And she has her heat lamp on one side and then her water bowl on the other side. And she loves her heat lamp. She's the only of our snakes that does. And you know, I think I mentioned her personality already, that she's just she's very cool. She's very fun to watch and very interactive. So, you know, a lot of snakes are very secretive during the day and they just enjoy hiding and hanging out, whereas she's fairly active, and she's also very gentle and very sweet. So I think that covers everything under the sun that I wanted to tell you. And I'm looking now at the comments. Hello, everybody. Hello, Johnny. Hello, Melissa, and all my other friendos. Melissa, so I think you mean garter snakes. So garden snakes and gardener snakes are just that's a misnomer of garter snakes. So sometimes, so any wild snake will bite, or it can bite, but that's only as a last resort. So that's their only weapon that they have in the whole wide world, is their mouth to protect themselves. And so snakes are going to want to bite as a very last resort. More often than not, garter snakes especially will do something called musking, which is where they kind of pee all over you. And, you know, some other behaviors, some snakes who are not rattlesnakes will even rattle their tails. They'll hiss or they'll puff and try to do everything they can to threaten you and seem bigger and seem scarier. But what they really want to do is peace out. And if you imagine how big you are as a person, you are so frightening to them. Even if they seem aggressive, or as people, we're scared of we're scared of snakes. We're naturally scared of spiders, even though so many of them are so tiny. It's, you know, but to put it in perspective that like we're looming big over them, there's not usually anything to worry about. And again, she's 2.5 years old, or we've had her for 2.5 years. She's probably going on 3. And no, so spotted pythons will not eat other snakes. There are plenty of snakes that do eat other snakes. King snakes, which also are found in the United States, they will eat other snakes. Sometimes if snakes are really, really, really hungry, they can or will eat other snakes, but mostly it's like specific snake species that prey on other types of snakes. And I'm sorry to hear about your gecko, Johnny. All right, everybody. I think that I covered most of the questions right now. So hi, Mikey. Hi, Terrence. Hi, Shane. Hi, Alex. I think I got everybody. All right. Whew. Okay, so let's move on to the spooky stories. And remember that tonight's question about Spooky Talk has to do with the blob, which slowly engulfs people in a horrific manner. So I really feel like that's a good description of 2020. And the question for Spooky Talk is, what is the biggest mess you have ever made, and how did you clean it up? So I think what I would like to do first is cover the territory that we lost from last time, and that's when I was reading The Thing, from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So I'm just going to read that to you one more time, and because I did not bring it with me on my journey, I'm going to read it to you from the interwebs. So here we go, everybody. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Surprisingly, they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark, it was hard to tell for sure. As quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. But soon it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road, then turned around and returned to the field. Then it came for a third time and started toward them. By now, Ted and Sam were scared, and they started running. But when they finally stopped, they decided they were being silly and childish. They weren't so sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon, they saw it, for it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try and touch it. Then we'll know if it's real." He courageously walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes that sunk deep into its head. It looked almost like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed, and again he and Sam ran, but the corpse-like figure followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it, appalled. It stayed out in the road for a while, seeming to watch them in return, but once more it vanished. No more than a year later, Ted grew horribly ill and the sickness killed him. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, he looked just like the frightening thing they had encountered the year before. Okay, so let's move on and we'll read a story from Short and Shivery. So I picked out a short one. I mean, they're all short. They're called Short and Shivery. I understand that. But this one is nice and sweet. The Lovers of Dismal Swamp. This comes to us from Virginia, this legend. And I've heard other variations of this legend before as well. So let's enjoy it together once again. All right. There is a swamp in Virginia with an open stretch of water at its very heart. Some people call this Drummond's Pond, but it's also known as the Lake of the Dismal Swamp. For almost 200 years, folks say, it has been haunted by two sad ghosts, and this is their story. The daughter of a family that had settled near the marsh contracted swamp fever. For days she lingered while the young man who planned to marry her sat by her bedside, holding her hand tightly. By never letting go, he seemed to think that he could hang on to her life, which was slowly slipping away. But she died and was buried on the edge of the swamp. The young man was so grief-stricken that he refused to go to the funeral. For days he refused to eat or sleep, nor would he listen to any words of comfort. After much pleading, his family and friends convinced him to begin taking care of himself, and he did recover a measure of health, but his mind was never the same. He began to fancy that his bride-to-be was not dead, but had merely wandered into the silent, shadowy depths of Dismal Swamp. "She's waiting for me there," he told his friends. "She's hiding because she knew death was looking for her." Later his family heard him mutter, "I'll go and find her, and if Old Death comes looking for her, I'll hide her in the hollow of a cypress tree until he goes away." The young man's family feared that he might harm himself, so they kept him confined to the house and watched him day and night to keep him from going off to look for his lost love. But one day he slipped away and ran into the swamp. For a time he heard his father and brothers and friends calling his name as they searched for him, but he only plunged farther into the marsh. Finally, the sounds of pursuit were swallowed up in the distance, and the silence of Dismal Swamp all around him was broken only by the cry of a water bird or the splash of a frog and the persistent buzz of insects. For days he wandered, eating berries, sleeping on hillocks of dank grass, or curled in the roots of trees. His face and hands and clothes were torn by brambles. His boots were caked with mud. Several times he narrowly avoided a run-in with a poisonous water snake that slithered over the wet earth. At last he reached Drummond's Pond late one evening. A will-o'-the-wisp hovered over the surface of the water, far out from shore. "There she is," he told himself. As he started through the falling darkness at the bobbing light, he cried excitedly, "I see her! She's standing there holding a lantern!" Quickly he began gathering together fallen cypress boughs to fashion into a raft. When the flimsy craft was ready, he launched it into the water, using a long tree limb stripped of its leaves to pole toward the center of the pond. He was sure he could see his girl, floating so her feet rested lightly on the black surface of the lake, smiling at him. In her right hand she held a lantern high like a pale beacon to guide him. With her left hand she beckoned him to join her. "I'm coming, darling," he called, and shoved the long pole even deeper into the murky depths. But his eagerness and a sudden wind that swept across the water, raising waves, undid him. The hastily built raft came apart, and he sank, splashing and crying out his love's name into the dark water, never to rise again. But hunters who have found themselves near Drummond's Pond when the sun is setting claim to have seen a ghostly raft drifting quietly over the black waters. At the front sits the wraith of a young girl holding a lantern that gives off pale light. Behind her is a ghastly young man who pulls them along as they vainly search for a way out of Dismal Swamp. That is The Lovers of Dismal Swamp from Short and Shivery by Robert D. Sansucci. I think that's how you pronounce his name. What next? What next? So now we're going to return to last week as well after Snakenanigans ensued, and I lost half of the footage because I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to technology, although I fully blame Dewey since he did knock over the microphone and cut the power. But I am going to share tonight 2 stories that my Uncle Bernie shared with me. One of them comes from last week, and I may have shared it earlier this spring during Spooky Story Tuesdays, but I wanted to share it again because I like the vibe. It's called Mama Sarah, and this also comes from Virginia. This is a story that took place in 1996 in Chatham, Virginia, in Pittsylvania County. Pittsylvania. Wow. Thank you to the latest people who have joined us as well. I would like to restate that tonight's Spooky Talk question is, what is the biggest mess you have ever made and how did you clean it up? All right. So this is in my Uncle Bernie's words. This story took place at our family's plantation home inherited by my cousin, Taylor Lee Meadows. It was July 1996, and Deborah and I had been dating since May 6th, 1995. I wanted my Chatham family to meet her. This is the home of your grandfather's sister, Aunt Dorothy, Aunt Dot, who will be 95 in November 2011. So this story that he sent me is even a bit old at this point. This old tobacco farm is 400 acres in size, and the last tobacco crop was in 1985 and was also the best crop in the history of the Meadows farm. The plantation was built by Hunt Meadows Sr. and his wife Sarah in 1900. I visited there often as a young boy and hunted the farm with my cousin Taylor as a teenager. I had also visited there in April 1969 on my way home from being discharged from active duty in the Marine Corps. I remember that Mama Sarah, as Hunt Meadows' wife was always called, made a nice family picnic for me on that visit with, get a load of this list, southern cured ham, homemade apple pie from her apple tree, homemade peach ice cream from her peach trees, all of the fixings from her large garden, watermelon, onions, tomatoes, cucumbers, sweet peas, corn on the cob, homemade biscuits with churned butter, sweet potato pie, black-eyed peas, mashed potatoes with red-eye gravy, deviled eggs, homemade jams and jellies, and watermelon pickles. Can we also hear it, ladies and gentlemen, for my uncle's memory? What a feast. We all ate like kings and queens. She had also made homemade iced tea for us with crystal clear spring water from their spring, which had originally been used by the Shawnee Indians and is still in use today. When Deborah and I arrived in Chatham in July 1996, the entire family, all of my Meadows cousins, Taylor, Richard, Frankie, Bill, Sarah, and Aunt Dot, had a wonderful picnic again in Mama Sarah's honor. Hunt Meadows Sr. had died in 1957, which was my first funeral, and Sarah died in 1976. Deborah and I also had the honor of staying in the plantation home with Taylor on that visit. We actually slept in Mama Sarah and Hunt Sr.'s bed in their original bedroom. It was approximately 5:15 a.m. the next morning as the sun began to rise and shine through the drapes of the bedroom window. Deborah was asleep to my right between me and the bedroom wall. As I looked at the sun coming through the bedroom window, I noticed a white figure of a woman to the left of the window in the corner beside the dresser. We both stared at one another for a minute or so, Deborah still asleep beside me. I did not want to startle her or our visitor. The form slowly drifted toward the windows, and I could see Mama Sarah as plain as day. She merged with the sunlight coming in through the window and was gone in an instant. I felt good, not unnerved, about seeing her. I could hear Taylor in the kitchen, so I rose from bed to greet him good morning. I shared with him what I had seen, well, who I had seen, only minutes earlier. He was pleased and noted that even though no one else had seen a ghost in the old plantation home, several relatives had heard footsteps upstairs or felt the presence of someone touch or caress them. Taylor and I then left to feed his cattle and stopped to drink from the old spring house, using an old dried gourd as our cup. The delicious water was crystal clear, so refreshing and ice cold. We did not share the news with Deborah about the spirit until after she had fixed us a wonderful breakfast. After the breakfast dishes were washed and dried and put away, we sat her down in Taylor's living room and told her about my experience. Deborah was not at all upset about what had occurred. It had been 20 years since Mama Sarah had passed away. I told Deborah that I felt Sarah was curious about who was sleeping in her room, especially who the man was that was sleeping on her long-deceased husband's side of the bed. And when she recognized me and knew I recognized her, she was at peace and left us to enjoy her lovely home. Amelia, I have been back to that home countless times since that trip in 1996, and I've never had that experience again. So that was my uncle's story, and I have another one as well to share with you after we do our more scary stories to tell in the dark. All right, let's see where we're at here. Okay, so more scary stories to tell in the dark by, of course, Alvin Schwartz, illustrated by Stephen Gamble. And, the illustrator for Short and Shivery is Catherine Colville. Just wanted to mention that. Make sure all creators get credit where credit is due. All right, so this one that I'm going to read is called One Sunday Morning. Ida always went to the 7 o'clock Sunday morning service at her church. Usually she heard the clanging of the church bells while she was eating breakfast, but this morning she heard them while she was still in bed. That means I'm late, she thought. Ida jumped out of bed, quickly dressed, and left without eating or looking at the clock. It was still dark outside, but it was usually dark at this time of year. Ida was the only one on the street. The only sounds she heard were the clatter of her shoes on the pavement. Everybody must already be in church, she thought. Ida took a shortcut through the cemetery, then she quietly slipped into the church and found a seat. The service had already begun. When she caught her breath, Ida looked around. The church was filled with people she had never seen before. But the woman next to her did look familiar. Ida smiled at her. It's Josephine Kerr, she thought. But she's dead. She died a month ago. Suddenly, Ida felt uneasy. She looked around again. As her eyes began to adjust to the dim light, Ida saw some skeletons in suits and dresses. This is a service for the dead, Ida thought. Everybody here is dead, except for me. Ida noticed that some of them were staring at her. They looked angry, as if she had no business there. Josephine Kerr leaned toward her and whispered, "Leave right after the benediction, if you care for your life." When the service came to an end, the minister gave his blessing. "The Lord bless you and keep you," he said. "The Lord make his face to shine upon you." Ida grabbed her coat and walked quickly toward the door. When she heard footsteps behind her, she glanced back. Several of the dead were coming toward her. Others were getting up to join them. "The Lord lift up his countenance to you," the minister went on. Ida was so frightened she began to run. Out the door she ran with a pack of shrieking ghosts at her heels. "Get out," one of them screamed. Another shouted, "You don't belong here," and ripped her coat away. As Ida ran through the cemetery, a third grabbed the hat from her head. "Don't come back," it screamed, and shook its arm at her. By the time Ida reached the street, the sun was rising and the dead had disappeared. Did this really happen, Ida asked herself, or have I been dreaming? That afternoon, one of Ida's friends brought over her coat and hat, or what was left of them. They had been found in the cemetery, torn to shreds. There's a telling of that legend in Short and Shivery as well, that's a little bit longer and goes into more detail. And it sounds like, according to this book, that the legend originated in Norway, or, that version of it originated in Scandinavia. So I thought that was very cool. Are there any questions as we go along? Brenda's sharing her mess story. Excellent. Let's all stop and read the mess. Ooh, paint, a paint spill. Ooh, yes. I can say for sure that the worst mess that I ever made happened this year. Actually, it happened recently. Jonathan and I had a little bit of a snafu, if you will, with a sriracha bottle that fell onto the floor after it had been uncapped. And we had our own little episode of like forensic files. It was ungodly. All right, friends, the question for tonight for Spooky Talk, if you haven't heard yet, is what is the biggest mess you have ever made and how did you clean it up? And the spooky connection is talking about the 1958 movie The Blob. So the final story that I want to share with you tonight is a handwritten letter that came to me from my Uncle Bernie. And it's kind of just, it's another, I guess we have kind of a, more, maybe a bit of a religious theme this evening, or a Christian theme, I should say. And so this kind of also, goes along with that. But it's another sort of interesting, nostalgic story. And I appreciate his storytelling style and his wealth of experiences that he's had over his lifetime. So I'm going to share this one with you. It's called the Virgin Mary Medal. And I'm going to do my best. His handwriting is pretty cool. So this is his handwriting, and I'm going to try not to stumble over it while I read, because it's not that it's messy. It's just, I'm not used to reading like handwritten stuff all the time. I think it's so cool that we have this kind of correspondence. All right, ready? The month is late March 1967, and I am about to complete my third month of a 13-month combat tour. My platoon, reinforced, approximately 45 Marines and 1 corpsman, have been assigned to guard 2 artillery units, one in a U.S. Army 175 mm Mobile something unit, the second a South Korean 155 mm something unit. So this is obviously when he was deployed in Vietnam. In an attempt to keep myself clean, I would draw fresh water from a well inside our lines. The water was not for drinking, as I would... Uh-oh. There we go. As I would take a bucket of water up and something our squad tent, bird bath off, and clean my jungle utilities. On one such occasion, I approached the well with rifle and bucket in hand. I was only a PFC then, had filled sandbags all day, so it was about 4:30 p.m. Suddenly, I saw a flash of light reflected off of something shiny and small. I thought perhaps an enemy soldier had got through the barbed wire and had booby-trapped the well. Upon further inspection, I could see a small metal object. I blew the sand away and found a Sacred Heart medal with the Blessed Virgin Mary on the other side. After my bath, I put the medal on my dog tag chain. I ate my sea ration dinner and went to my assigned bunker for security watch for the night. Amelia, I have shared this story with only a few since 1967. 2 Marines shared a bunker so one could rest on occasion. The days and nights all ran together back then, 53 years ago, at age 19. That night I noticed I could see and hear better than ever. I could smell better and had a 6th sense. A 6th sense? He writes with a question mark and an exclamation point. An inner voice told me that I would not be killed in Vietnam, although I was wounded on 3 separate occasions. And then he puts the dates, 4/18, 5/18, and 6/20, 1967. The enemy tried to overrun us that evening, but were unsuccessful. The next day, I noticed my lieutenant, my squad leader, and my fire team leader all looked at me in an unusual way. They said I looked different. I had changed. I felt I had begun a relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary. And then it all began after we left the artillery outfit 30 days and returned to our regular Alpha company. On day patrols, I could sense we were going to be ambushed, and we were. I told my squad leader every time I had the feeling, and it did occur, that Corporal Mack asked me not to tell him anymore. I felt wolf-like with my senses and noticed 2 other Marines had the same abilities, as they could see at night, hear like me, have senses like me, and no apparent fear of death. The 3 of us became inseparable, and our officers took note, and soon the 3 of us were walking point, day or night, for the Alpha Company, 250 Marines, the 1st Battalion, 600 Marines, and finally the 7th Marine Regiment, which was 2,000 Marines. The enemy felt we were dangerous and put a bounty on our heads, $500. Ha! Pencil-drawn pictures of us began to appear on trees and fences. As long as we remained together, it seemed you could not kill us. We got wounded together, but stayed healthy. We actually, the 3 of us, walked point for the 7th Marine Regiment, round trips 80 miles, as on a World War II Chinese paved road into the area of North Vietnamese 2nd Division area to only see tigers and elephants. A division is 10,000 strong. We were lucky and blessed. We should never have survived what we did, plus destroying several enemy machine gun bunkers, tagging a few snipers as well. So yeah, this is very real. I got 2 battlefield promotions, 1 to corporal and 1 to sergeant, and in all of their wisdom, the new officers separated us. On 8th October 1967, Sergeant Carl Boudreau was wounded so bad he was rotated to the States, and I was not with him. On February 6, 1968, Sergeant Robert Ewalt was killed in action, and I've got to tell you that his memory is just insane. I can't remember what happened last week, and I was not with him. Sergeant Boudreau did recover and passed away July 2015. He lived a good life, and the old wounds in Agent Orange finally took its toll. He was 67 when he died. I lost that medal I found in March 67 while water skiing on the Severn River, the Severn River, a river. I tried to retrieve the medal as it sunk like a 14-cent piece. I could see the Blessed Virgin Mary's face as she sank into the abyss of that river over 50 years ago. I think it's Severn River. The meaning I had placed on losing the medal was, Mary had guarded and protected me for several years, and she felt I could make it on my own from there. It seems I have to put a meaning and purpose to everything I experience in life. I pray to Mary every evening when I go to bed, and that makes me feel good. Take care, and God bless, Uncle Bernie. And this letter I received from him recently. This was on May 19th of this year. So not perhaps a ghost story, but a fascinating story nonetheless. So that concludes our program for tonight. This is much more along the lines of Spooky Story Tuesdays, where I would promise a half hour and then go on, forever. So does anybody else have any questions? And would anybody else like to share the biggest mess that they have ever made and how they cleaned it up? I definitely want to know. I can't help but be curious. And then we can all share in that Schadenfreude together. So if you also have other questions about snakes or about Moonlight, you can feel free to ask me those anytime as well. So here she is again. This is Moonlight, the spotted python. Extreme close-up with her beautiful eyes. She looks like she has a velociraptor face, or maybe I just think that. I have no idea. She's gorgeous. She's wonderful. And of course, we love all of our snakes. And I was going to say, I feel like, they don't have ears. So snakes don't have traditional outer ears the way that we do. And they also don't speak language. So they wouldn't know if I admitted that she's kind of my favorite. But I do love all of our bebes. And of course, it's always a good reminder, adopt, don't shop. We support conservation efforts. We support environmental efforts. And now is more important than ever for us to be mindful of that. And so even if you think that snakes are ooey, this is still an opportunity for us to talk and have those conversations about how important it is for us to take care of this precious planet that we live on. Now, next week, my special guest is going to be Miles, the corn snake. You don't want to miss Miles. He's our other wily boy, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And I think, oh, and yes, Brenda, she is full grown, or approximately full grown, with being almost 3 years old. She will continue to grow, but these are some of the smallest pythons, spotted pythons, in the world. And let me think. I think I made it through all bazillion pages of my notes, and I made it through this whole thing without a fly landing on my head. So I would like to announce that as well. And if anybody has any more questions, you have 1 more minute to put in your questions or tell us the biggest mess that you've ever made. And if not, I will see you next week, same time, same place, for Snakenanigans and Stories. Stay spooky, my friends. Thank you for joining.